this stillborn baby seemingly has some compulsion to have a child. Why, hello there, and welcome to episode 1 of The Hunt. So, being the first episode, I wanted to briefly explain what The Hunt is about. The Hunt is a casual series that is covering various topics from the Souls games. That includes Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, maybe even Sekiro, and just covering various topics and maybe putting a highlight on some things that haven't been discussed when it comes to story, lore, mechanics. There will be a bent toward narrative and lore discussions, but it's really just a sort of a catch-all. And as we hopefully get closer to Elden Ring will be rolled into this as well, discussing, you know, stuff as it comes to light. The organic nature of discovering lore in these games lends itself to doing a semi-frequent show to sort of catch the evolution. But for now, we will be covering a variety of the games, and I wanted to start off episode 1 with a Bloodborne topic. And I wanted to discuss a post that I actually wrote back in 2015, November 13th, 2015, The Chord of the Eye and Communion with the Great Ones. I wanted to take a look back at this post and sort of give it some 2021 eyes just to see what I think about this theory now. And just because it's a take in Bloodborne that I don't see brought up very often, and I just wanted to see sort of how I felt about it now. So I've looked at it, but sort of being a casual series, I wanted to make this something where we can sort of explore together, and it's sort of organic, so it's sort of workshopping along with me, and so therefore feel free to join in the comments and present your own discussions, counter arguments, what have you. And before we get into it too, I want to mention this show is only possible because of support on Patreon. So if you are interested in getting this episode early, which patrons have gotten this episode early, and also just supporting the channel in other ways, you can check that out at patreon.com/thelorehunter. So with that, let's get into The Chord of the Eye and Communion with the Great Ones. So I wanted to start off by reading a few item descriptions. So these will be the descriptions for the chords of the eye. And the basic argument that I have here and that I'm making in this post is that with the third of the umbilical cord, which I'll refer to as the chord of the eye, it's a relic that is used by people in Bloodborne to commune with great ones. The first part of every chord of the eye description says, a great relic, also known as the chord of the eye. Every infant great one has this precursor to the umbilical cord. And this is used in rituals to commune with great ones. Mensis uses it. The hunters, Lawrence and Gehrman use it to communicate with the moon presence, and I believe it is used elsewhere, as I will get into. But so this comes from infant great ones. And my argument is that when you use the chord of the eye to commune with great ones, that you are actually communing with the infant great one that the chord of the eye came from, the one that it's associated with. So let's get into that. The most obvious one, and the one that sort of kicked off this theory in the first place for me, was the one for Mensis. And every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. This chord granted Mensis audience with Murgo, but resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. So we know that Murgo is the stillborn child of Queen Yarnum from Thumeria, and Odin, I never pronounced that right, but you know what I mean. Erden, and back in the day, and that is who we are sort of silencing when we get to Murgo's Wet Nurse. That's who Rom is sort of covering up, in addition to the Pale Blood Moon. And so that's what got me thinking about this, because Mensis wanted to communicate with the Great Ones, and as we heard from Mikolash, maybe he was reaching out to Kaz, but instead they got Murgo, and what happened is when the School of Mensis did this ritual, it resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. And we find that stillborn brain in the Nightmare of Mensis hanging from that chain, and who you slay eventually. But it's with Murgo, and it's interesting that even though Murgo is stillborn, they were granted audience with Murgo, but basically they couldn't handle it, and it warped them and transformed them. But it is interesting too that I'm going to be referencing an episode which will be in the item description, but the Snack Covenant, Sinclair and Sophie, they discussed last year that with the Great Ones, that they all kind of want, that what they want is to have children. And even in this case, with Murgo being the stillborn, there's always this birth imagery, and in this item description it says, that this, it resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. So even this stillborn baby seemingly has some compulsion to have a child, which is a strange sentence, but and that's what results in the Mensis brain, is that horrible eye-filled brain monstrosity in the Nightmare of Mensis. And so let's look at some of the other item descriptions just to see if this pans out with these other chords of the eye. The next one is that we find on Imposter Yusefka, and that one says, Provost Willem sought the chord in order to elevate his being and thoughts to those of a great one, by aligning his brain with eyes, the only choice he knew, if man were to ever match their greatness, their being the Great Ones. And this is an interesting chord because I think a lot of people, and I mentioned this in the article, which is linked in the description, is that when people meet Imposter Yusefka and she's sort of writhing on that table, that they think it's sort of like an Ariana situation where perhaps she's being impregnated by Erden or whatever is happening during the hunt. And what she did seemingly was she swallowed this chord. And it makes sense as a member of the choir who's sort of gone rogue. I think that the choir, as we've seen that they got into the Nightmare of Mensis, it makes sense that they would also go to Bergenworth. And I think they took the chord that Provost Willem used in a ritual to commune with the Great Ones. And I think what we're reading here is there's sort of two schools of thought as to Rom. And one was that Rom was a Bergenworth student who transcended. And the other one, which I subscribe to, is that Rom is the child of Ebrietas, and that's part of the reason why Ebrietas is staying behind, because she doesn't want to leave behind her child Rom, who she can't really get to because Rom is in this protected moonlit lake. But that's sort of my thought for part of the reason why she cooperates. Ebrietas has a desire to have Rom around, so this description, following that logic, is if Willem had this chord in order to elevate his being and then he communed, it would make sense that he communed then with Rom, who is the child of Ebrietas. And and I'll include a post in the item description that fleshes this out for someone who's not familiar, but the idea is that Rom was perhaps a special child from Thumeria or some other time who transcended who transcended into Rom. So the idea then is that, as an infant Great One, there was the cord, and when Provost William used it in a ritual, he had contact with Rom, who's right there at the lake, right next to Bergenworth. So I think that pans out as well. Then let's look at what I think is where it gets really interesting, and is something I bring up in the post and sort of trying to suss this out, and I think we can sort of discuss this here, and this is where I'm really interested in some feedback as well. Is every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. And this is found in the abandoned workshop, and this is what Lawrence and Gehrman used to gain an audience with the moon presence originally. This is what, as they say, precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, aka the moon presence, and beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. So once again, we have this situation where the Great Ones want to have children, and this, conceiving the hunter's dream, holding Gehrman captive, maybe almost as a surrogate child. And then this sort of interesting thing that comes up, if we're following this logic, would be then that the moon presence is the child of a Great One. And this got me thinking, and I'd be curious to hear thoughts. In my original posts, I get sidetracked into why then, if the moon presence is the child of a Great One, why it might want you to kill Murgo. I'm not really going to get into that. I think that is a little bit off base, honestly, from this post. But what I would be interested in then is instead thinking about, if the moon presence is the child of a Great One, do we know who that Great One might be, or what's the history there? And what I touch on in this post that I wrote back in 2015 is that I thought that this description I just read to you is actually changed from the original release. The version that I first played and before the first patch actually said one of the heirlooms used to contact the Great Ones, originating in the child of the Vile Bloods. Long ago, in an encounter with the Great Ones, a contract was established, establishing the hunters and the hunter's dream. So in the original, or like as part of the process, this cord of the eye was originally supposed to come from a Vile Blood child. And I don't know if that's still the case, but I don't really think it is, but I do think that sort of as that leads, that it makes the most sense that Erden would be the Great One associated as the parent for the moon presence. And it kind of got me thinking as I was thinking back on this, because if we go back to as Sophie and Sinclair mention in their video linked below, is that the hunter's mark and everything that the moon presence seems to be doing does go back a ways. And I was thinking then, what if, because every Great One loses its child, what if the moon presence is the child that was lost by Erden at some time past, and like Murgo was sort of like, the surrogate, to sort of replace that. And part of that got me thinking is like the moon presence, it's all bony, it's all torn up, and it looks like it was fatally wounded. And as we know with like Murgo, and that death for a Great One isn't exactly death in the normal sense. And it got me thinking, wondering if the moon presence died, but that, on some plane it still sort of lives, and that it's just sort of perhaps disconnected from other Great Ones. And then it got me wondering if part of the motivation of the hunt, I do think that the moon presence wants to have its own surrogate child, and being dead, it can't have children. And so it sort of is using Garamond perhaps to get another, perhaps to find someone to transcend, um, or it's trying to get Murgo. I'm not even sure, but it does make me think about how when Rom sort of you defeat Rum and the barrier is sort of weakened between the planes of Yharnam and things start going really crazy, that the pale blood moon comes out and Murgo starts crying. And it got me wondering if a similar connection is that Murgo and the moon presence are both children of Erden, and it would make sense that all this stuff with the scourge of the beast and the blood, that as children there's a relation there where they're also drawn by the blood in a similar way. And that it would sort of make sense too that the moon presence and its own children, the hunters, and Gehrman as a surrogate is very much into the whole blood thing and the blood echoes, and utilizing that as power, because that's what Erden, formless Erden, is all about: blood and the oozing blood. And it would make sense then that the moon presence is doing something sort of similar. And also something that came up in Sophie and Sinclair's video is that in the strategy guide, in some concept art, the moon presence is mistakenly labeled or whatever, but it's called like Erden basically, and it's this like big winged version where the moon presence, its wings are actually big, and it seemingly is not injured. And it got me wondering if the moon presence, as the child of Erden before dying, its physical body at least dying, if it was this big winged creature and then something happened and it died, and then Erden, because they lost their child, yearned for a surrogate, which led to Murgo. So there we go. I hope you that's basically what happened. I would be super interested to get some comments, just there's thoughts there. As super exciting spending the last few days getting back into some Bloodborne lore here in 2021, just getting that going again. I think Bloodborne's such an interesting game because it gives so much room to come up with these interesting theories, and I think this is a pretty interesting one. It does lead to some interesting thoughts, as hopefully I put out here. I know it's probably a little rambly, but I wanted a more casual workshop sort of thing, because I'm not presenting something that I would want to present maybe as a complete idea, and or it would be nice to have this formal presentation, but I like the idea of it being a conversation, and I'd love to get your comments in there, and give me comments about how you like this first episode of the series as well. I'm trying to keep it sort of casual, that way I can keep producing it, and that way we get the most interesting content to talk about also. So this has been episode 1 of The Hunt. Right now this will be coming out every other week. If you're a patron on Patreon of any level, you will get early access. And I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons for supporting it and making this show possible, and continuing to help me produce more and better content. And I want to also just throw out there that I do have goals to make this a weekly show. So if you really like this and you want more of these discussions, there you go. And especially when Elden Ring comes out, I'm going to have a lot of stuff going, but this show would also be awesome as a way to talk as these snapshots about Elden Ring as we are organically, as a community in a game, exploring it. I think that all sounds great. So yeah, let me know what you think about this idea of the cord of the eye and communion with the great ones, if you are communing with the infant or the child that the cord comes from, and if so, what you think about the ideas of the connection with Murgo and the moon presence and Erden. So yeah, let me know, and I will see you next time. Thanks.